Hey everyone, and welcome back to the It Depends podcast. I, as always, am your host, Kevin Goldsmith. And on this episode, we're going to do Q&A. This is the third episode of Q&A and the last for now. The plan I have is that we'll do some more of your excellent questions. And I'm sorry I didn't answer all of them on the podcast. I will try and answer them in emails. Or if you're okay with it, I'll answer them at some future date on the podcast or in the newsletter. The next episode, my plan is to do a bit of a meta episode where I talk about the actual process of writing the book and maybe also talk about the podcast, the newsletter, mostly because when I've gone to meet with CTO groups or other kind of folks like that, I get lots of questions around how did you write a book? Why did you write a book? If I wanted to write a book, how would I go about writing a book? I think people, and it's totally understandable, I think people are interested because they're considering it themselves. And I would recommend it. I would absolutely recommend it. So I'm very happy to share my experiences and my tricks and all that kind of stuff. If you're interested in making a podcast, if you're interested in writing a book, I'm hoping that I can give you some help or at least some tips in that way. So that's what the next episode is going to be in 2 weeks. After that, so that'll be towards the end of June. After that, my plan is to take a break. So take July, take August off, have a bit of a summer. I'm very proud that I've been consistent. I have not missed an episode since we launched the podcast and the newsletter at the beginning of last year. It's now been 18 months. I would like to have a weekend where I don't have to produce one or the other and enjoy the summer a little bit. It's been a very busy, very tough year, and I would like to have a little bit of a break. But my plan is to come back in September and in a new format, a bit of a different format. I also want to create a website for the podcast itself, some other things, some administrativa, and just having some time to do that would be great. So we'll do one more episode of this first season, and then we'll take a break for a couple months and come back for the second season. Hopefully that gives you some time during the summer to catch up if you want, or to read fiction, or have some fun yourself. Or, if you're in Southern Hemisphere, that gives you your winter to catch up because you maybe didn't listen during your summer. So this episode, we've got a few longer questions. I'm not going to do as many questions, but we'll get right into it in a minute. I want to let you all know that I haven't been doing as many public speaking gigs as I used to. Partially it has been because I've been super busy with both work and doing the podcast and stuff. And so that's made me a little bit less open to taking some of those. I do plan to get more into that again next year. But I am speaking in October at Lead Dev in New York. So last year I spoke at Leading Edge in New York. This year I'm speaking at Lead Dev. I will be attending Leading Edge as an attendee. So if you go to Leading Edge instead of Lead Dev, you'll see me there too. But I am speaking at Lead Dev and look forward, if you are thinking about going or you are going, looking very much forward to seeing you there. I will be giving a talk on how to fix friction between product and engineering teams. I talked a little bit about that last episode, but this is a talk just about that. Let's get into the first question. First question comes from Aisha K, seeking advice on promoting collaborative culture despite competitive review structure. Hi there. As a staff engineer at our health tech startup, I've noticed some silos forming between engineering teams that might be related to our performance review system. After listening to your recent podcast episode on performance reviews, I realized this challenge might be more common than I thought. I've been trying to encourage more knowledge sharing and mutual support across teams, but I'm finding that our competitive evaluation process sometimes works against these collaborative efforts. Engineers seem hesitant to spend time helping colleagues when they're being measured primarily on individual deliverables and impact. Would appreciate your thoughts on practical strategies to foster collaboration while still maintaining the performance standards our leadership expects, perhaps something that has worked well in similar fast-paced environments. I'm particularly interested in approaches that work for senior individual contributors who are expected to drive both technical excellence and team growth. Thanks, Aisha. Couple things about this. One, Aisha, you mentioned that you're a staff engineer, which tells me you're probably not managing these people. So you're not writing their reviews, which makes this a little bit more challenging. And secondarily, that the performance review process is really structured around individual achievement and not collaboration. I've talked a bit in the podcast, prior episodes, about my experience working at Microsoft in the 90s. So I was a developer at Microsoft and I became a lead there. So I was now writing reviews and responsible for reviews. If you weren't around then and you don't know much about it, Microsoft in the 90s, and this is when Bill was still in charge, Bill's a very competitive person. And that's one of the things that's helped Microsoft grow and become the successful company it is. But the company was really, I felt, in Bill's image, which meant that performance review structure was really based around individual achievement and not team achievement. As a lead, but also as an employee, your team had to follow an expected distribution of review scores. Now, it is not unreasonable to look at a team of 50 or 100 people and expect that there's very few high achievers. I mean, there hopefully is some, but obviously the entire team can't be high achievers. That just means you're not grading well. I talk about that in this performance review chapters of the book that were in the podcast. So there might be a few folks that are doing exceptionally well. There might be a few folks that are struggling, but the vast majority of people are doing just fine, right? So it's kind of a bell curve. We were expected to also have that bell curve distribution. But whether this was intended by the company or not, this went down to the individual team level, which meant if you're managing 4 people or 5 people, you were still expected to have a bell curve, which I will tell you is completely unreasonable. It is entirely feasible that you have a team of 4 people, all of whom are above average, right? Relative to the larger organization. So saying in a team of 4 people, you have 1 high achiever, you have 1 low achiever, and you have 2 folks who are in the middle is completely unreasonable. It doesn't make sense numerically. But that's what we were expected to do. Now, this created a whole bunch of what I've always assumed are unintended consequences, but they were pretty well known within the company, and the company didn't address them for the entire time I was there. I've heard they made a bunch of changes to the performance review process after I left, which was kind of mid-2000s. They used to grade up to 5, 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, 5 being almost unobtainium, but a 4 or 4.5 possible if you really exerted yourself. Everyone wants that 4 or 4.5 because the other thing was that your raise, your stock grant, and your bonus, when they had bonuses, were tied to that number. They took that stuff out of the hands of the manager. And so the manager got to give you a number, and then everything else came from that number. So getting a really good high number was critical if you wanted a raise, a good raise. So in that world, if you and I are on a team, and I know only one of us is getting that 4 or 4.5, why would I help you? Right? I want to help you. It's not like everybody on teams hated each other, but the system was set up in a way that made it very much like you're talking about, Aisha. The system was set up in such a way that it made collaboration not only doesn't encourage it, it actually actively discouraged it. Because if I help you achieve your goals, I'm taking time away from my goals, and now you're going to get the better score that I can't get. It doesn't matter how good I am, I can't get it because it only goes to one person. Hopefully your company has learned from that, which means that it's not tied to this forced distribution. If it's tied to this forced distribution, I'm sorry, Aisha, you can encourage it, but the system is set up to actively discourage it. You can do whatever you want. You can probably encourage a little bit more, but you're not doing the reviews. So you can't make it happen yourself by saying, when my team, I'm going to include collaboration as a metric that I'm going to use to determine who gets the higher scores. If you have a system like some companies do where it's not 100% the manager, like 360 feedback or that kind of stuff is an active part of it. And certainly as a staff engineer, you're going to have a lot of influence there. You can do what you can to kind of really talk up the collaborative aspect and maybe try and influence whoever is making the final determination. And you should. But at a certain point, you're just going to have to acknowledge that the system is set up to challenge this. You can do some different things to help, but you're going to need to change the system at a certain point. Because if I'm going to pick the dumbest metric possible, the number of check-ins a developer does, and I'm using that to influence the score. Me as developer, what do? I increase the number of check-ins. I create every line of code, I do a check-in or something like that. People will game the metrics if they know that gaming of the metrics is going to benefit them. If I know that me getting more done gets me a bigger raise, and me helping you gets you a bigger raise and not me, I'm not going to help you. So one, I think you need to excuse this kind of consultancy, agile, coachy kind of phrase. I think you need to expose the system to itself. I think if you're seeing this, have a talk with a director or a VP or the CTO and say, hey, it kind of feels like we're set up to do this. Is that what we want? And if the answer is yes, you can do what you want, but people are actually happy with the way it works and you're probably not going to change it. And if that is really important to you, maybe that's not the right company for you. And to be fair, it took me a long time. As I said, I worked there 8 years, but I eventually figured out that Microsoft was not the right company for me. The things I needed to do to be successful at Microsoft were not things I wanted to do. I wish I had a more satisfying answer for you on how you could create a culture of collaboration in an environment where reviews are based on individual achievement. But the bad news, there isn't an easy way to do it. You clearly, unless you came in as a staff engineer, you came up through that system. So you do understand how it works. Hopefully you have the ability to influence it or maybe bring in collaboration as some of the goals, because you're absolutely right. As a very senior IC, you can make the rest of the organization more efficient, more effective, and that's going to be better for the company. And people working together versus working across purposes is going to be better for the company, especially the way we generally do software now, as opposed to the way we did software at the 90s, where software was an individual sport. Now software is a team sport. You can try and influence it, but in the end, that if that core system is based on individual achievement, it's just not in people's best interest to try and work together. So you got to try and change that system or influence it at maybe individual manager level. Sorry if that was an unsatisfying answer, but it's unfortunately the truth. Next question. This is a long one, so stick with me. This comes from Mark. Subject is seeking your thoughts on engineering, innovation, and guild structures. Hey, Kevin. Hope you're doing well. I am, thank you. I've been following your It Depends newsletter. Your recent piece, Thoughts on Emulating Spotify's Matrix Organization in Other Companies, was timely given what we're dealing with here. I'm reaching out because I'm wrestling with a couple of challenges as we scale our AI platform, and I'd love to get your perspective on both. Okay, I'll read them both and then maybe I'll address them separately. First, I've been thinking about how we can better foster innovative thinking among our senior engineers while keeping everyone aligned with our product roadmap. Our most experienced folks have some genuinely brilliant ideas, but we're struggling to channel that creativity into our strategic objectives. What approaches have worked for you in creating space for technical exploration and creative problem solving while still hitting quarterly deliverables? I'm especially curious about strategies that work in our kind of fast-paced startup environment. Everybody's got a fast-paced startup environment where we need practical solutions alongside innovation. Second, I'm considering rolling out a guild structure in our engineering org to break down some of the silos that are forming between product teams. As we've grown, I'm seeing knowledge get trapped in individual teams, and I think guilds could help. Have you seen successful guild implementation in other startups? I'm particularly interested in how teams balance guild participation with sprint commitments and whether there are specific approaches that work well with diverse technical backgrounds, as we have a pretty international team. I know you've navigated similar scaling challenges, so any insights you can share would be incredibly valuable. Thanks for always sharing thoughtful content with the community. It's helpful to see how others are tackling these problems. Best, Mark C. Thank you, Mark. So yeah, that is two different questions. I do think potentially the answers could be related, but I'm going to address one, then the other. Maybe we'll figure out how I tie them together. But specifically, how do you foster innovative thinking while being aligned with the product roadmap? Having brilliant ideas that are not aligned to the product roadmap, that's great, but that's not necessarily useful. If what you mean by brilliant ideas and what you mean by innovation is leading product, like ahead of product, or enabling new products, that's really interesting and potentially valuable. If what you're saying is engineers have a bunch of really innovative ideas that have nothing to do with the product roadmap, that's a separate problem. Okay. And if what you're talking about is we have innovative ideas to build stuff, but when do we get time to build the cool new stuff that is aligned to the product roadmap because we're trying to hit our quarterly goals? So each of these three things I just mentioned is a different area. So I'm not even really sure where to begin here, but I'll do my best to look at all three of these. So first of all, if you have ideas for lots of innovation that is not aligned to the product roadmap and not aligned to potential future product roadmap, that's great, but probably not worth derailing product roadmap to achieve. Product roadmap is usually reviewed, hopefully with your team, with the engineering team, or at least the engineering team leadership and the rest of the company leadership. So if that's product roadmap, it's already, the company signed off on it. It's hopefully aligned to the company roadmap. And so trying to do something that isn't supporting that would not be considered a good idea. Second, if you have innovation that is sort of leading or rather enabling future product, that is interesting. And certainly that's part of my job as a CTO, is to look ahead technology-wise and figure out the things that we can do as a company, how we can innovate that will enable future product stuff. That's one of the things I have to do. And there are senior engineers that work with me on some of those things. But I'll tell you, I'm very careful that I and the folks who are supporting these efforts, that we're not holding the product back, right? That we're not endangering deliverables, that we're not endangering commitments in order to do that. And so that means that we're generally building prototypes or testing ideas. And when we find these kind of new avenues that may enable kind of whole new product areas or more advanced products, then we work with the product team to figure out what a product could be utilizing this sort of innovation. The third thing I talked about, which could be really what you meant, and follow up, send me an email or contact me on social if I got your question wrong. But the third thing about, no, we have an innovative way to build this product, but we get held back because the fear is that we don't have time to do this in the innovative way. That's a different problem. And that has more to do with how your planning goes and how much engineering is involved in the planning and commitments. In that situation, I'm going to try and differentiate this from pure tech debt. Innovation is a way to solve tech debt. You clean up tech debt with kind of new approaches or new ways of doing things, more up to date, because a lot of tech debt was innovative for its time. It's just not aged well. The way I'm differentiating between these two things, like how do we solve this new thing in an innovative way instead of the old way, versus how do we take something that's already done and change it, update it. Tech debt isn't tech debt unless it's actually hurting the product today. So that's how I'm going to differentiate this. So tech debt's holding you back. This is, we want to solve this new thing in a new way instead of solving it in an old way, because we think there's some innovation that can be done in the implementation. Now, so that part, if you're being held back on that, that's a product and engineering problem. Maybe you should come to my talk. But that's kind of a product engineering alignment problem. That either means the engineering team wasn't really consulted in the discussion around this new thing to be built. And so product made some assumptions on how it was going to be built based on history, which may be incorrect. Or product is trying to dictate the how when really engineering is the one that are supposed to be deciding what the how is. Product is deciding the what, engineering is deciding the how. This is a bigger problem, but a solvable one, assuming that you actually have a relatively good relationship between product and engineering, working with the product team to reevaluate the best way around implementation and then adjust dates as appropriate. But obviously, in this situation, you're going to have to explain why this new innovation or innovative way of doing this implementation is better than whatever was the way you would have done it in the past. And one of the ways to do that is to talk about how doing it in this new way, if you're successful. And again, innovation, it requires risk. And that's sometimes hard to get folks to sign off on, but usually there's a reward associated with the risk. So if you can innovate in the way you build this, hopefully it isn't just you're building the same thing in a new way, but that will unlock either another level of scale or another level of quality or another set of additional features, or it makes building a different thing on the product roadmap easier. There has to be a motivation or rationale for doing it in this innovative way, besides just you want to. If the reason is you want to, somebody on the team read a blog post and got really excited about doing it this way. Yeah, that's not going to fly. But if it's actually, if we do this, we're going to get some additional benefit and that makes it worth the risk, that's how you can get some buy-in. But also make sure when you're taking a risk, you want to innovate in how you build something, make sure that there is some guardrails there to protect. If you're saying building a feature the old way would take a month, building a feature the new way is going to take 2 months, but you get all this cool stuff that's going to come along with it, that's going to save you time long term. Amazing. At the month mark, make sure that this thing you thought was going to take 2 months instead of 1 month isn't actually going to take you 6 months, because that's where this all falls apart and also damages your ability to innovate in the future. If at the 1 month mark, you're still looking good for 2 months, awesome, keep moving. If at the 1 month mark, you feel like you haven't really made any progress, it may be time to say, you know what, we thought we could get this done in 2 months. It really doesn't look like that's going to happen. Let's go back to doing the old way. So that's where you have to, as a counterbalance towards convincing the product team or the company leadership, we want to try an innovative approach to solving this problem. You have to take some accountability to say, if we're wrong, if we thought this would work and it won't, here's how we're going to make sure this project doesn't become a year project or a 6-month project where we're just continuing to throw energy at it, even though what we committed to isn't going to achieve it. So that's the first question. The second question, the guild structure in engineering orgs. Of all the elements of the Spotify model that companies have adopted, beyond just using some of the terminology, I've talked about adopting another company's terminology and then doing something different. The word squad to me is now completely useless because companies call team squads, even though they're not in the way that Spotify meant, and Spotify was the ones who really coined that term. Guilds is besides the terminology, guilds is actually the thing I hear the most of companies adopting. And the cool part about that guild idea is that it doesn't require you to adopt any of the rest of the Spotify model. It's just essentially a company-based club with people who are interested in a similar thing. And it's a chance for them to meet. So companies used to have bowling teams, companies have softball teams. Those are essentially guilds. It's an opportunity for folks in different teams who don't normally work together to spend time together to talk to each other. And in the Spotify model, there were purely social guilds that had nothing to do necessarily with work, but just acted as an opportunity for people in different teams to do stuff together. Then there were, though, the work guilds. And that's where I think this comes back to your question about innovation. Because one of the things that the guilds help do is share ideas, and share ideas around technology, share ideas around architecture, perpetuate best practices from the bottom up, from the teams themselves, as opposed from leadership down. Spotify was this really great bottoms up culture during the Spotify model days. That has been a really, really valuable thing. So if you're looking for innovation and you're trying to figure out how to do it in a way that isn't disrupting product roadmaps, one of the best ways to do it is, rather than have a team specifically try and drive some innovation or a new way of doing something, is actually spread that out across multiple engineers on multiple teams, where they're each giving a little bit of their time or supporting an effort or trying things together, which one helps multiple teams get access to these ideas and try them out, but also has lots of good minds thinking about it and different experiences. So you can actually have some better ideas. And the Spotify work guilds, the backend guild, the front end guild, mobile guilds, like they would actually drive innovation and new approaches to building stuff within that group. And that group acted as a bunch of peers talking about the best way to do something. And the ideas would incubate through these groups. So that is actually another way to help drive innovation, not just within a team, but across multiple teams. So another part of your question was, you're particularly interested in how teams balance guild participation with sprint commitments and whether there are any approaches that work well. There are no guild commitments. Again, I think I've said this in an earlier podcast, but the thing that a lot of companies got wrong when they tried to implement what they understood to be the Spotify model is they thought the chapter had work associated with it, that the squad had work associated with it, and that the guild had work associated with it. And the question I would get a lot of times is, how do you balance guild work versus chapter work versus squad work? And the answer was, there is only squad work. There is no other work. That didn't mean, let's say, I was just talking about guilds trying to drive kind of innovation or new best practices or those kinds of things. They would talk as a group. All the back-end engineers or all the front-end engineers would say, we should switch to this library across all of our teams. So work would come out of that, but that work would happen in each team. It would come through the backlog, be prioritized with everything else. It wouldn't be assigned from the guild. And now an individual developer is trying to explain to their product manager that they have to do guild work instead of squad work, or in your case, teamwork. So the simple answer to your question, how do you balance guild participation with sprint commitments? Attending a guild meeting is an hour. It's no different than attending any other meeting in a week or whatever. A guild meeting might be an hour a week, or maybe an hour every other week, or an hour a month or whatever. That's not really a challenge versus one-on-ones or any other meetings. There is no work that entails, in your question about guild participation, there's no work there that shouldn't be coming through the team. All the work gets managed by the team. So that practically, that isn't really a challenge if you implement guilds in the way that we talked about it at Spotify. And I believe guilds do support innovation to tie these back together, just by being a peer group that you can discuss and can support and can bring other ideas in and help shape those ideas, and maybe even distribute the work of trying out some of these ideas across multiple teams so they aren't impacting roadmaps as much. But in the end, the developers in the guild, if they want to do something, it's still got to go in the backlog of their team and get managed like any other work item and potentially negotiated within the team. All right, our last question comes from Grace. Dear Kevin, I recently finished reading your book, It Depends, and found your insights on navigating technical decision-making particularly resonant. Thank you very much. Your emphasis on context-driven solutions has me reflecting on my own challenges as a front-end engineer trying to influence broader technical strategy while remaining in an individual contributor role. I'm passionate about usability and accessibility. I've been leading our accessibility initiatives, but I'm struggling with a multifaceted challenge that seems to encompass several related issues. Here's my consolidated question. How can I effectively advocate for accessibility and inclusive design principles in a fast-paced startup environment where I need to influence tech stack decisions and strategic priorities from an IC role while balancing our ship-fast mentality with thoughtful technical choices that serve all users? More specifically, I'm finding it challenging to get accessibility and usability concerns properly addressed in our technical strategy meetings. Leadership often views front-end work as just making things pretty, and these concerns frequently get deprioritized in favor of shipping features quickly. I can see customers struggling with usability issues that our team keeps deprioritizing, and I'm concerned that our quick technical decisions aren't considering all user needs, potentially creating accessibility debt. I'm looking for practical approaches to demonstrate that accessibility isn't just the right thing to do, but also smart business. I want to frame these concerns in a way that resonates both with business and technical stakeholders while being pragmatic about implementation costs. How can I maintain our development velocity while ensuring we're making deliberate technical choices? I've tried time boxing design discussions, but I'm curious what strategies have worked for others in similar situations. Your perspective on how to advocate for these changes without overstepping boundaries as an IC would be particularly invaluable, especially given your experience with context-dependent technical decision-making. Thank you for your time and for writing such a thoughtful book that's helping me navigate these complex professional challenges. Best regards, Grace M. Thank you, Grace. This is a really smart question, and it's a really common question. How do you prioritize accessibility? Now, as somebody who's worked in both B2B and B2C, while it shouldn't matter, it does. Generally, accessibility is prioritized lower when your product is a B2B product, because in a B2B product, the end user maybe is influential or has influence in the decision-making around buying the product, but it's usually not an end user decision. And so unless the company is really thoughtful about their employees that have accessibility challenges and makes that part of the vendor purchasing process, that tends not to be a criteria necessarily. And because you're going sales in, oftentimes whoever's responsible for the buying decision isn't necessarily going to be thinking about it, especially if it's a much bigger company. So it doesn't mean it doesn't exist in B2B, but it certainly is less common. In a B2C world, where you're basically losing customers if you're building inaccessible products, and it is a customer by customer decision, that's easier to justify. There's also a lot of other benefits as far as SEO and things like that to having an accessible product, reviews, all those kinds of things. Now, in an ideal world, again, it shouldn't matter. Like, every product should be fully accessible. And this is a concern that we should all have. I'm just saying, if you're trying to convince the product team or marketing or others that the investment in accessibility is worth it, it's a little bit easier if you can actually point to the statistics, and those statistics are all publicly available. Folks who have site issues, folks who have difficulty interacting with interfaces that aren't accessible because the buttons are too small or they're too hard to see or things like that. And you can very easily use those statistics to show how many customers you would lose by not having an accessible site. And I have definitely used those types of arguments. To be fair, I've never had a company, including B2B companies, that would come out and say, this is not important, we don't care about it. So I've never had that. But definitely I've had the similar challenge you've had, where I want to make accessibility just part of our definition of done for every story, and gotten pushback just because the amount of time it takes to do it. One thing you can do is there are accessibility automation tools. And you can run those on your site. You can get some scores back and you can show to everyone, look, this is how inaccessible our product is, our site is. And this is what it means is a lot of people we want to be able to use our product can't. That is going to work better if you already have good product market fit and you're trying to get more of your total addressable market, right? So you have the right product for the market. At that point, like every percentage, every person you're excluding by your product being inaccessible is a big deal. And you can use that justification. If you're at a very early stage company, I can definitely advocate for trying to build that in from the beginning because it's much easier than to come back after and have to clean up, because I've had to do that multiple times and get the product to be accessible after the fact. It's always harder to do that later than if you start at the beginning and just maintain it. But when the company is trying to just get to profitability and you can do a new feature that's going to get you 10 million users, and you can do that in 3 weeks, and you can get a product that's going to get you more users because it's accessible, but it's going to take you a few extra days, you might lose that battle. You can talk about the goodwill you'll receive, and there is market value to that. There's customer loyalty because of that. There's a lot of those things, but those things are generally hard to attribute, generally hard to measure, and that's always going to hurt. No one's going to come out and say, we don't care about accessibility. Everyone cares about accessibility. But if you're getting them to prioritize it and they think there's an easier thing we can do that's potentially going to bring us more customers, you're going to tend to lose that battle. So I would really look at it in terms of keeping a measurement, and you could build a graph. One thing I think I might suggest, just to keep it in the forefront and keep people aware, would be to build a dashboard. And it's not hard to run, as I talked about, these accessibility tools, to run them on a site, to run them on an app, and to have that be part of every build, or if that's too much, once a week or whatever. And that way you are measuring the accessibility of the product and identifying particularly bad areas of the product. So I would be doing that and just measuring it and making that visible and making that public. And along with that, what you could do is say, here's our total customer base. Here's the percentages of folks that wouldn't be able to use this part of the app, or wouldn't be able to use this part of the app, or have problems as identified by the accessibility automation. Then you could keep just a running tally of how many customers that your product is losing because it can't use your product. And eventually someone's going to see that, and you publish a report every month with the latest numbers. And at a certain point, someone's going to look at that and go, we are losing so many potential customers because we haven't been willing to do the not hard work, but we haven't been willing to do that work on accessibility. And that's where you can capitalize on it and look for these opportunities that you might call the burning platform opportunities, where we need to get that next level of customers. And you can do an accessibility push. If everybody works on it, usually you can actually get the site or app into a really good place in a relatively quick amount of time. And that gives you like a whole marketing cycle where you can talk about how the companies really put a lot of effort into accessibility. There's awards. When I was at Onfido, the design team really championed accessibility, and we won awards for it, and we got press about it. And we weren't shy at telling the world, we care about this. This is important to us. That helps. That kind of stuff helps. This is just a really challenging thing. But I can tell you, every company I've been in where we reach that point where we say, you know what, we really should make this effort and we should maintain it. Once we get to a good place and start maintaining it, no one questions it anymore. It's just, this is just part of what we do. It's considered just part of quality. It's considered just part of the definition of done. And it's really just been getting to the point of making it clear that the effort, the energy involved to do this is worth it. So, Grace, I hope that's a good answer for your question. Everybody, thanks once again for listening to another episode of It Depends Lessons in Technology Leadership. In 2 weeks will be the last episode of this season. I'll talk about the practicalities of writing a book and publishing a book and promoting a book and creating a podcast and a newsletter or whatever. Please, if you are interested in this and you have questions about that, please send them to me, contact@itdependsbook.net. And I'd be very happy to answer them. I'll see you next week in the newsletter. I'll see you in 2 weeks back here on the podcast. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.